thank you everyone for being here. For those of you who are attending an event here the first time, please note and get on our mailing lists because we often organize events like this. And Kashmir in particular is an area of great interest to many of the people working here, doctoral students as well as academics. So I welcome you all here, and we have this panel, this amazing panel, which is rare, as Devesh mentioned in his post, because it's an all-women panel, and we're going to be talking about gender, among other things, in relation to Kashmir. So our first speaker is Bi Ishrat Hassan. She's a PhD scholar at TIS that we just spoke about in Mumbai, and she documents the narratives of Muslim women from the scenic but conflict-ravaged Kashmir, who embody an intersection of multiple beleaguered and marginalized identities by being women, Muslim, and Kashmiri. As you know, that intersectionality plays a very important role, and we will be reflecting on that. She insists on choosing her identity rather than letting an orientalist or nationalist discourse dictate an identity for her. This is her introduction, and I think that it's something that immediately alerts us to how significant it is about how the lines of identity are drawn at the self, the I, and the I of the others, and how difficult it is ever more to negotiate that place of choosing your own identity. So I apologize for being slightly late. I have traveled, and literally less than 24 hours ago I was in South Asia, and not long before that I spent much of the last few weeks in Kashmir. So I look forward to hearing and to sharing what, it's one thing to read about what's happening, and it's another thing to be in a place where at this moment, as we speak, that all mobile services are suspended. I spent the last few days there not being able to, so your phones, unless you have a specific kind of postpaid SIM, you can't call out or call in. So your phone just becomes a little box that you carry, and it's of no use. You can't access the internet, you can't call or receive, you can't find out who's where, and all that you hear about in the newspapers is of more encounter killings and greater unrest. And the newspapers are, of course, also very divergent, based not only what you hear here about Kashmir, but what you hear in India about Kashmir, from what you hear in Kashmir about Kashmir, and that too from different newspapers. When I say Kashmir, I mean Kashmir Valley right now. So I'm really looking forward to this panel. Floor to Bi Ishrat Hassan.
Thank you so much for the generous introduction. Good evening and welcome. Thank you for turning up, and I thank you, the organizers, Professor Devesh, Anand, and Dr. Natasha, for letting me this opportunity to speak. Because apparently we seem to be living in an age and times where free speech and expression is a luxury that everybody cannot afford. As Natasha mentioned, that it's true for the place that I come from, at least, which is not, it's become the order of the day. The state-imposed communication blockades, restrictions, and sweeping media censorship, etc. So thank you for letting me speak here. I am here to speak about the women of this land, which is wrapped in this irony of being a metaphorical paradise on earth, as well as the most densely militarized zone on earth. Natasha's mentioned it, that we need to pay attention when we talk about women, Muslim women of Kashmir. We need to pay attention to this aspect of intersectionality. These women are the bearers of multiple beleaguered and marginalized identities, be it their gender identity of being women, be it their religious identity of being Muslim, or be it their Kashmiri identity, their ethnic identity of being Kashmiri. We understand all these identities have lately become fodder for popular media as well as academic debates. And if we talk about Muslim women, there is a lot of stereotype construction and expert theorization that surrounds this identity. And the stereotype of Muslim women that we have right now is that of a veiled, shackled, and secluded victim who is a victim of her own overwhelmingly patriarchal Muslim culture. And it's a different matter than when we speak about Muslim women. It's mostly, we take the women from MENA region as representative of Muslim women, notwithstanding the fact that majority of Muslim women are from, regions which are not Arab. Lots of Muslim women population is from South Asia, so we do not take their lived experiences into consideration when we speak about Muslim women. Also, that when there is a debate about Muslim women or their identity, the debate is often polarized into a debate about whether Islam is emancipatory or it is completely inherently misogynistic. So there is the debate where it starts and where it ends, and the actual lived realities of these women are hardly taken into consideration. And now if we talk about these women, because I'm taking into consideration here the identities of a Kashmiri women, the identity has been rather reduced to a hyphenated identity of woman in conflict. We know little about a Kashmiri women's lives, apart from her being a wailing victim who is sandwiched between combating forces, of the Indian army or the militia. And there is little that is available in the public space about the actual lived realities of the life of a Kashmiri Muslim woman. So here we are that Kashmiri Muslim women have been subjected to epistemic violence. We have to acknowledge that. But I have to make an honest submission here that I started my research not with a motivation to counter this epistemic violence. I have to be really honest about that. It was rather shaped by my own struggles of living as a rural Kashmiri Muslim woman. My frustration was more with the patriarchal structures, norms, and practices of my own community. And it was at a time, the times were complex because you had this debate echoing loud in the global media that Muslim women need to be saved. And a whole lot of occupations, brutal occupations and bombings do get legitimized in the name of saving me, the Muslim woman. So this is a sort of confusing time for you. And as an impressionistic mind, as mine was, I at times felt like, yeah, maybe, aren't we one of those Muslim societies who seem to have invented the patriarchy, and this is it. Yeah, we are patriarchal and we are a Muslim society. It was only after I stepped into the field that I realized that, first in my proposal, when I submitted my PhD proposal, I stated it there that I'm making a self-conscious move of not engaging with the conflict aspect of Kashmir. I'm not going to engage with the aspect of militarization and all that. My focus will be entirely to uncover these patriarchal practices and norms which are emanating from Islam. But it was after I sort of stepped into the field that I realized that, ignoring the fact that Kashmir is a community under siege, I was doing it at my own peril. That's what I understood, that Kashmir being a community under siege, that forms the context. Here I'm not trying to say that I have to exonerate the community from all the blame. I still believe that there is a lot of stuff, a lot of patriarchal practices, a lot of misogyny that does often get legitimized in the name of religion, etc., etc. But then you have to scratch the surface a little bit, and the story is more complex than it seems. So this crucial interplay of local patriarchy and occupation, I was able to come to this understanding that the armed occupation is not just about, because we often highlight the sexual vulnerability of women in the course of this conflict, that many researchers are focusing on that aspect. And now recently we have a body of literature coming up which has sort of shifted the focus from this passive victimhood to aspects of agency. I think this shifting of the lens is necessary because this scholarship has a sympathetic concern that women who often tend to be, sort of made invisible from their national history, that they should be reinstated so that they do not end up becoming bystanders of their own history. So the role played by women in the nationalist politics, this aspect of literature is sort of trying to focus that. But anyhow, my observations about, after conducting interviews with women from Kashmir, I came to an understanding that, first there is a patriarchal relegation of issues of gender justice to a secondary status. We have to accept that. When we talk about societies in conflict, there is a strange rendition of personal political divide is played out. The tyranny of the oppression of the structures of patriarchy within the community, they're sort of seen as the personal issues of the community, which can wait or maybe wait endlessly, or they're seen as issues or non-issues sometimes. But the tyranny of the militarization is acknowledged, and that is seen as primarily political, which needs to be contested and which needs to be fought against. I observe that there was little acceptance for raising this frivolous issue of gender justice within Kashmir, and that too in the midst of the resistance movement, when people feel that there is the real issue of national liberation. And I remember talking to this student who was in her BSc final year at Government Degree College, Pulwama, and she confronted me literally like this: are you seriously a Kashmiri? Because I do not believe that, because you have been talking about this issue of gender and stuff. Do you think really this is the time when we need to speak about these issues? And she was totally hostile to the question of gender asymmetries in Kashmir. And then I realized that, shall we call it that occupation is resulting in delay of the feminist consciousness among the Kashmiri women. So I'm not jumping to the conclusion, but this is sort of a preliminary observation that occupation is definitely leading to a delay in the emergence of feminist consciousness among Kashmiri women, because there is an absence of expressed resistance against these gendered relations of domination within the community. There is no resistance to that. Although you may see Kashmiri women participating actually in the national movement, but then does that participation effectively translate into feminization of the political spaces? No, it doesn't. Because the traditional structures of patriarchy are intact. So you sort of feel tempted to raise a question, because this participation of women, it is often celebrated by even by the patriarchs of the nationalist movement. It is celebrated a lot, but you sort of feel suspicious that is this participation of women, because when you are not welcoming, when you are disapproving of other feminist articulation of the feminist demands in another sense. So here, when you're celebrating the participation of women in nationalist movement, when you're celebrating their throwing of stones at Indian army, so there is a suspicion about, is this participation being, by the patriarchs of the nationalist movement, is this being viewed only as instrumental in realizing their own patriarchal vision of a new state? But let me tell you that such conversations are muted as of now. Such conversations are muted in Kashmir. One reason may be that because my interviews with some Kashmiri female academics did reveal that we know it has been historically true that the women question has been taken as a prime justification for occupation. The colonizer claiming to be the savior of the women from their own cultures. So maybe that is one reason that such a conversation is not a welcome conversation in Kashmir. When you talk about, we know about there are issues of patriarchy, but why nobody is ready to raise a question? This is maybe an answer that people feel suspicious about. Maybe this conversation, if this conversation is initiated, maybe this will be appropriated by the colonizer to, shape a civilizing rhetoric for himself. And I think as researchers, we often, we need to stay true to our findings, although they may be absolutely uncomfortable for us at times personally. And I have to say that during my interviews in this rural setting of Kashmir, because my research is, I belong to district Pulwama, which is predominantly rural, and I'm conducting my interviews there. So more often I do confront an apologetic, defensive Muslim who sort of, when I point out that lots of a distinction between the cultural and religious is often blurred to legitimize so many patriarchal practices, and sort of people are defensive about Islam. I think in that case, I try to base my understanding on Mridu Rai's this groundbreaking historical scholarship work, which is Hindu rulers and Muslim subjects. I think she tries to tell us the origins of this religio-political consciousness of Muslims in Kashmir. She tells us about how the Dogra autocracy, how their, they try to hold on to power by using religion, by instrumentalizing religion and marginalizing their Muslim subjects. And after that, when in 1947, Kashmir is yet to gain freedom from from the Hindu Dogra autocratic regime, an Indian army, overwhelmingly a Hindu army, lands into Kashmir, and I think there we have an explanation that why Kashmir still feels that Indian occupation is not just an occupation of Kashmir, it's also an assault on their religion, their Muslim religious identity. So even if you see that there is a fascination for traditionalist interpretations of Islam, so you want to counter them with certain progressive interpretations, but you see there is little space for doing that, and that space is gradually shrinking because people feel defensive about, they feel possessive about what they feel is threatened. So I think that is one of the observations that I had from the film. Another was that military occupation itself is fostering patriarchal attitudes. Because when we talk about restricted mobility or imposing of a dress code, what comes to our mind immediately, and when the community in question is a Muslim community, so what comes to our mind is that it must be definitely something, it must be a religious commandment or something. That's why the Muslim women are secluded, their mobility is restricted. But I had this conversation with a girl who is in her 20s. She told me that once she remembers an incident from her childhood when she was in an apple orchard, and she was this little girl, and a barbed wire separates an army camp and their apple orchard. She tells me that she was called by this army person, and he complimented her that she spoke good Hindi, because he asked her, "Girl, what's your name?" So the girl told me that as I answered in Hindi, he complimented that, "Look at you, you are such a little girl and you speak very good Hindi." And the next comment was that even I speak good Kashmiri. And the army person, he used the Kashmiri word for vagina and told the girl that, "I'm good at Kashmiri, I know this word and I can even locate it on your body." So the girl tells me that she came rushing and shivering to home, and she narrated the incident at home. And after that, she tells me, "My dad was a tough dad ever since that day." So after that, she narrated how her mobility was restricted. She was not allowed to go alone to certain places, and definitely not the apple orchard. So there are these incidents where you understand that it's not a religious commandment that often results in restricting the mobility of women. It may be we have to be alert to the context that we are talking about. Also, the thing that the occupation forces, they constantly pose a challenge to the masculinity of the local male population. And we have this local male population, mind you, that they are also the believers in the hegemonic masculinity. So they always try to reinstate themselves as these protective guardians who can protect the nation, who can defend the honor of their women, because women are seen as embodiments of family honor and man's honor maybe, and their shame is the man's shame, their shame is the nation's shame. So the men of the community do feel a complex requirement of trying to see themselves as these protective guardians who can protect their women. And this has repercussions on the autonomy of women, and especially their bodily autonomy. So the last point I would like to mention is that the crisis of legitimacy of the state institutions. In a conflict setting, that is a reality. People do not often identify with these institutions of the state. And unfortunately, gender justice is the biggest casualty here. Because on day-to-day basis, women face violence and they have nowhere to go. I had this interview with a girl, Seherjan, who literally told me that she does not want her identity to be, she does not want to be anonymous. She wants everybody to hear about it. So she told me how once she was passing in the Pulwama market, and there was a guy who made an offensive comment, and she replied back and objected to his offensive comment, and the guy was like, he turned back and slapped the girl. The girl was courageous enough, though she tells me that it was completely an encounter with the state institution which she was unwilling for, but it was an imposed necessity that she had to go to the police and file a complaint. So the response she gets there, the policeman tells him that we cannot go to the site where this incident happened. The reason being that the day before there had been a protest. There had been a incident of stone pelting, and the police might have committed such horrendous things over there that the local population in that area, the police knew that they are hostile to us, and they told the girl that we cannot venture out and go to that place wearing our uniforms. So essentially what happened here, Seher tells me that the key witnesses, they were gone by that time because police did not agree to come to the place. And now when the girl reaches home, her family tells her, her community tells her that this was not a good step at all, because they explained to her that how the police, they're looking for excuses. Can I have some water, please? So yeah, her family tells her that the police these days, they have these regular encounters with the local stone pelting youth, and they're always looking for an excuse to ruin some boy's life. So this was not a good step at all, that you should have informed the police about it. So there is this mutual suspicion, and the biggest casualty here, as I see, is gender justice. The girl says that I just took my complaint back and I did not know. All I knew is that I got slapped in broad daylight in public, and there was nothing that I could do about it. So that is all. I think I should conclude here. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Ishrat. I'm sure that we would all like to carry on this conversation and speak further about many of the important things that you raised. I should mention that our discussant, Mantasha, who's also a PhD student with myself in Libya, has done an amazing job of organizing this, and I just wanted to thank her specifically for making this happen. So, Asya, Asya, who's our next speaker, she's going to show us a film or two as well. She teaches English literature at Baramulla Degree College in Kashmir. She's currently on a University Grants Commission Fellowship doing research on the literature of Kashmir. In 2008, she received a St. Hilda's research grant to study psycholinguistics at the University of Oxford. And before that, she has studied Caribbean literature at the University of Kashmir. She's authored 2 books, one called Language and Migration, Investigating Psycholinguistic Processes in 2010, and another one called Diaspora and Caribbean Aesthetics in 2011. She's also made 2 films and curated a website to help preserve the languages and literature of Kashmir. That's a little follow up here.
Thank you very much, Dr. for a very generous introduction, and thank you, Professor Anand Mantasha, for giving us this opportunity to speak here and to give our views. So I'll first be showing the film, and then we can maybe carry on.
Actually,
Yeah.
can I turn the light off first?
Yes.
It's okay, it's okay.
You can see it clearly.
Is it okay?
See?
It's a small 7 to 8 minute movie, and it's a silent movie.
Adimanchu Kensanjain, Karfut, Punchina Fiskarnams. Hukumat and Chilukan was a rich kermits, Tom Rosa to Garnimans.
This is a story, well actually not a story, a non-story in a way, like few images like put together and to give a glimpse into the ordinary day, an ordinary of a girl in Kashmir, a child or a girl, a woman, and how that's not so ordinary, it not be so ordinary because there's curfew and stuff, and that's on the surface level, and how she's trying to negotiate at so many different levels, trying to struggle against so many different forces. She's against the geography, for instance. I mean, Kashmir may appear very scenic at times, but then there is also the mud you may get your feet in. So you have to travel a lot of distance to go to the school maybe. Or certain other factors, also patriarchy, for instance, which is also like obviously the way the things are, the way she's dressed in. And then also the fact that how do they realize their aspirations in the midst of all this. So they have their aspirations which have to be realized. So that is one thing. And also the fact that how does art in a way give a temporary release or catharsis to situations which are beyond our control. So that is the surface theme which I wanted to convey. But I mean there are other subterranean meanings and symbols which are very context specific. Say for example the torn scarf could be could mean anything which you wear on the head. It could be a hat, a turban, a cap, anything which you wear on your head. So it getting torn could also mean humiliation in our context. So, and it could the weaving or the stitching of it could also mean the history, maybe like the journey of the history of humiliations which Kashmir has gone through. Like for example, showing an identity card at every checkpost is a humiliation. You having to raise your hands before an army person every now and then is humiliation. Somebody breaking into your bedroom in the middle of the night is a humiliation. And if you go historically back to to when Kashmir was sold, I mean it's the most humiliating thing. Like a place is sold along with its people. I think it's one of the most humiliating incidents in history. So there has been this history of humiliations, which is also like maybe symbolically I wanted to convey. And then of course there are other issues like what are the possible solutions. For example, can she buy a new scarf? But that's not economically viable. She doesn't have the money. Can she throw away the scarf totally? But even that's not possible because all the other girls are also wearing scarves. And is that stitch, can that ever go? I mean, it could also at a larger level mean that, be a story of Kashmir, for instance. It's stitched and not organically linked to any nation, for instance. The stitch is there. However hard you may try to, wipe it out, try to, do whatever, try to color it or whatever, but it will show eventually. So it doesn't go anywhere. So all these things I had in mind. And then the making of it was also very, adventurous in a way, and very, it was a lot of fun and a lot of adventure also. We wanted to be as real as possible. For instance, when we were shooting the army scene, we had to get up early in the morning and go to this place and see that even the army is patrolling so that we could shoot, but we couldn't. We had a permission for the shooting from the college and the other authorities, but even then it was very risky. So what we did is that we feigned that we were doing another shooting, which was like I told my cousin to take my pictures in the foreground, and in the background we hid another camera so that we could shoot the army that was coming. So they got deviated to this, and then we told the girl to go and come back. So that kind of things we were doing, and it was fun and very adventurous also. And the school which we shot in was actually, it's the last school before the border, like it's actually at the border. We could have cheated it, we could have done some other school, but I wanted to get the feel of it, to actually, so that, at some level I get that, that it's very realistic. So we did the shooting in Uri. It's near to command post, and you have to get a pass, kind of a permission to go to that area. And when we were driving through that area, at one place we actually, because one of the the army men was an actor, the other two, the one who's beneath the window is an actor. So his uniform and his toy gun, which looked like a gun, and his shoes were in the dicky. And when we passed through that checkpoint, and as I was about to get the permission, I realized that I have all that in my car and we might get killed. But luckily we didn't check it and we went through. So it was a lot of fun also doing this. Yeah, adventure actually. But we might have got killed when we didn't.
It also shows the flashback the girl is having, isn't it, about the incident,
sort of
from a girl's perspective.
Yeah, sort of the nightmare. What all this is in your the memory that you carry with you. It doesn't go that that wire where she gets stuck, and it's also literally that we are stuck on that wire, which is the border. We are in between it's an in-between space that we occupy, and it's very torturous to be in that kind of an in-between space. So that's what the situation of Kashmir is. It is hung on that barbed wire separating India from Pakistan because it's there. And partition has gone. I mean, with due respect to all the pain which people have experienced because of partition, but at least there is some closure. But for us, it's still happening. We are the product of it. We are the living reality of it. Because something can be done and it's not being done. So so it's our present, our past, and also like maybe our future. We don't know when it would solve.
So, yes. Thank you. And we'll have the Q&A and the discussion afterwards, but first Mantasha will be responding. Do I need to introduce
No.
Okay. Well, you've seen her bio, and Mantasha will be responding to the two papers.
I'll be responding through a few pictures which I have on computer. Thank you very much, Ishrat. Thank you very much, Asiya, for. I'm really so happy that we have a all women's panel, and no matter how many times I say, I think it's very important to be put it out clear that we've always had all men's panel, and it's the first time, and I hope that it continues. Thank you very much for talking about your own experiences and the experiences of women on ground. Since I, like yourself, was raised in Srinagar, was born in Kashmir, and I have had similar experiences which prompted me to do a PhD on a similar theme, and I'm also working on a similar theme. So largely, if I, like Ishrat reflected, talking about women in Kashmir, how women get represented, be it in academia or be it in media, it is obviously it has a context of looking at Kashmir as a Muslim community. It has a context of looking at Kashmir as an overly beautiful and exoticized place, or looking at Kashmir as a place of pain and helplessness. So in that, the first portrayal of Kashmiri women is that of victims. So women are often seen as widows. They are seen as half-widows. Half-widows are those women whose husbands were subject to enforced disappearance and never came back. And like Ishrat said, there are women who talk about state violence. There are women who talk about sexual violence at the hands of army, military, paramilitary. And there are women whose husbands, breadwinners, fathers, whoever was the man of the family is gone. And now that has put these women in the shoes of the breadwinner, and now they are out of their houses trying to look for their livelihood and trying to carve a space in the patriarchal society. So the representation of Kashmiri women as helpless, as victims, has been there for too long. It is not to say that this is not the reality of Kashmiri women. The reality of Kashmiri women is very often a lot of pain, because when the man of the family is lost and there is not enough education, there is not enough skill, and even if there is, even if there is education, there is privilege, there is skill, a replacement of a man of family or replacement of anyone in the family is not possible. It's painful. And women, these are women wailing after funerals, and they are women wailing at the funerals of their loved ones, maybe even their neighbors, and community people. And this is one image of victimization. And then from there we move on to the representation of women as activists. Like Ishrat highlighted, that women don't just sit home, complain, are not passive or relational, but they also come out on streets, they protest, they get angry, they try to carve their space. And like I liked what you said, that how much does women coming on roadside actually transform into feminization of the political spaces, which is a very valid point. And in my own work, I raise this question, that when we see a woman, a Kashmiri woman, picking up a stone and trying to hurl it at the paramilitary forces in Kashmir, does that mean that Kashmiri women are absolutely agentic and they have all their empowerment? Does that mean that if they are trying to fight against a political oppression, do they have equal space and agency to fight against the oppression at their community level or at familial level? Maybe not. Even the statistics, because I'm also looking at the literature which is present, even the statistics tell us that women in Kashmir education-wise, are much behind their Kashmiri men, and even when we compare it with the Indian average, they are much behind. So they are behind in a double manner, one behind their own men in education, and then behind the larger Indian population in education. Not just education, female feticide is also an issue. There are so many issues which tell us and hint categorically and statistically that women, the basic indicators of women empowerment are dismal in Kashmir. And denying that on cost of saying that our women are agentic and completely obscuring what women face on an everyday life, be it lack of education, lack of resources, is a little problematic. Although we need a very strong agentic image of a Kashmiri woman who is not just a victim, because Kashmiri women are not just victims, we know they're not just passive, but not on cost of ignoring their everyday realities. And then the third representation, which probably was not talked as much, this is earlier this year in April, when young girls decided to come out on roadside and hurl stones, and they got really angry, and hurling stones is a form of symbolic protest which Kashmiri boys and men do as a regular activity, as an acceptable activity, I would say. But girls coming on roadside was a little problematic for the community, because soon after, in a week's time, a militant came up with a video clip saying that our Kashmiri sisters and girls should stay home because this is un-Islamic and they're not dressed properly. And as you can see, they are dressed, I don't know, if this is not proper, what else is proper? I don't want to come up here with the definition of a proper dressing, because there is absolutely nothing as proper dressing, and I don't want to fall into the politics of respectability, like what black feminists say, the respectability politics, that you have to dress in a particular manner, act in a particular manner, behave in a particular manner as a woman. Then only we might consider listening to you. I don't want to fall into that trap, but just to highlight that these women are completely covered. And still, after that, a militant has guts, and he has probably an understanding of the society where his statement would be accepted. And not much furore was seen. Not much furore was seen that why did this militant come out with such a diktat. And it was not just this year. In 90s also, during the militant movement, which Ishrat highlighted, that it is not just the armed militarization from the state side, but also from the militia side, which are the local community, local young men, who tried to kind of go against the state, Indian state, and started an armed rebellion. But in that also, they tried to, their first victim were their own women. They tried to tell women how to wear, not to abort, not to go to beauty parlors, theaters, cinemas, everything was shut down during 90s, which is yet to reopen. And this might be seen as a very frivolous statement, because there is a bigger oppression to be fought. And building on that, which Ishrat rightly highlighted, that in a conflict region or in a society which is facing a high violence, a high oppression, oftentimes what women face in the community is not heard, it's relegated to a secondary position, and women who try to talk about it are often seen with mistrust. They are told that, are you trying to defame the movement? Are you trying to, are you a spy? Are you a spy working for the Indian state, or are you on the payrolls of Pakistani agencies? Because this is the local politics of India and Pakistan, the larger nation states, which deny the nationhood to Kashmir, the border region. So in this situation, it reminds me of black women in the 60s and 70s in the US who were trying to fight alongside with their black men in the civil rights movement. One of the women says that black women suffer from sexism at the hands of black men and white men, and they suffer from racism at the hands of white men and white women. So women are marginalized, women are doubly subjugated, and I wouldn't even call it doubly subjugated. In my work, I use Menjivar's term as multiple oppressions. So it's not just doubly, but in fact, oppressions build onto each other, intersect, and talking about all these things is not acceptable. The easiest way is to deny it in the community, and the only way when it gets acceptability is when you are talking about violence by the state. Not to say that state is less violent, state is extremely, extremely violent, and if we build a hierarchy of oppressions, state oppression is on top. But that should not obscure any of the other oppressions happening in the society. And I often feel that a fight against one sort of oppression should entail fight against other sorts of oppressions. And for a community which is suffering for a long time, has been suffering historically, has been under oppressive and despotic rulers, should understand that in order to build progressive politics, a multi-issue intersectional lens is very necessary, in which gender cannot be ignored and gender cannot be told to wait. That cannot be put in the waiting room forever, because as Cynthia Cockburn and other feminist international relation theorists highlight, that gender, or when I say gender here specifically, I'm trying to say women, not to homogenize gender as just women. Women are told to wait, that when we will get political independence, your issues will be solved. But in my understanding and in my lived experience, gender battles are much more older and much more longer than any other battles, be it battles of nationalism or border or anything else. And the need is to put them all together and see them. And reflecting on Asia's movie, the metaphors which she uses, the symbols which she uses, be it the barbed wire, which obviously looks like something like this, or be it the stitch on the head of this that girl on the scarf, that also looks like something similar, or be it the border between India and Pakistan. It is all a line. It is all the cartography of the region, which is reflected in the bodies or embodiment of all the nationalist narratives and all the patriotic ideas, or even what Ishrat rightly reflected, the orientalist understandings of Muslim women. So all these things are reflected in that movie, or can be seen in that movie, in which a young girl has an aspiration of going to school, and there's also an absence of men in that movie, as you would have observed, which is largely the case in Kashmir in certain homes now, that men are not there, women are trying to do everything they can, and still they do not get that position, they do not get that respect, and then young girls trying to struggle, get her education, walk a long distance. And I even liked when she said, we walk so much that our feet get muddy. So it was more like a metaphor, like feet getting muddy. We walk so much, our feet are so muddy, but there is really no water to remove that mud anymore. And we have to, as community and as society, try to push for more progressive narratives which represent us and try to break these shackles, because endlessly, as Natasha would like to elaborate probably now, how endlessly people are getting killed, and on funerals more people protest, more people get shot, and this seems like a vicious cycle which never comes to an end. Throughout my life I have seen it, Ishrat has seen it, I'm sure Asia has seen it. All of us, we grew up there and grew in this extremely militarized society, which is also overly patriarchal. I wouldn't really hesitate calling my community overly patriarchal. It is definitely, along with being highly militarized. And if we really boil down and really break down the larger understanding of patriarchal narratives based in culture, religion, or even nationalism, they definitely are similar. They speak to each other and rely on masculinities. And I would end by saying this, that I don't think that militarization and patriarchy have a causal relationship, but they definitely have some sort of relationship, maybe an intersectional, maybe a fluid, more, moving into each other, or as Liz Kelly calls, if I would borrow, continuum of violence. So that would be something which I would conclude with. Thank you very much.
Before opening up to questions, let me just thank the speakers again and reflect on a few things, as well as give a bit of context. So I think that as a people, Kashmiris face collective punishment, right? All Kashmiris are being punished for being Kashmiris most of the time. Now, the question of secondary status of gender in conflict that you mentioned, and that we are all familiar with. I mean, I had this student who was working on Congo, and it's the same story everywhere, that gender justice can wait. It's like a secondary thing. The question, I think, is because when people say that, they think gender is about women. So, the idea that gender justice can wait assumes that when we say something about gender justice, we're talking about justice to women only, and that is somehow disconnected from the larger structure of which men are also a part. And I think that idea that, in the last few weeks, as always, you get into discussions with people, and it's not so much people that they can't see the manifestations of the injustice, but it's just somehow assumed that when you speak about gender, you're speaking about women, and that somehow what's happening to women is not connected to all the other things that are happening in society, of which men are clearly a significant part of. So so some of these things echo, of other places like South Africa, apartheid South Africa, like Northern Ireland during those struggles, like Palestine. When the idea just of for example, of somebody needing to go to the police to ask for justice becomes a problem, because you could be seen as an informer, you could be seen as somebody who's implicating other people, and if you raise a voice, then you would be seen as somebody who's going against the solidarity and could be used by the opposite side, and that's not unfounded at all. Because if you follow the debates in India, it's that what Ishrat talked about is very much there. This idea that we are the liberators is very much something that is used by the Indian state to say that these are, it's what Gayatri Spivak, the post-colonial theorist, once spoke about, white men saving brown women from brown men. And the project is not hard to see in those terms. It's like Indian men saving, or Indian men and women saving progressive men and women, saving Kashmiri women from Kashmiri men, where the word Kashmiri is used in such a way that it's automatically assumed Kashmiri means Muslim, and Muslim means backward, and backward means they're all conservative. All societies are patriarchal. Like any patriarchal society, Kashmir has significant problems, and in a conflict zone, that gets exacerbated. And the statistics, when I just went online, and one of the biggest problems is, of course, India as a whole ranks 127th in gender inequality. And the biggest problem with, in terms of Kashmir, the oldest brides in the region are in Kashmir. So, these two things I thought were interesting. That Kashmiri women are the oldest to marry in the country. The age at which they marry is the oldest, so they're the oldest brides.
What's that age?
25.2 years. So, not old at all, but that's how it was reported in the site I was looking at. And but the starkest thing is that in terms of labor force participation, that has been going down for women. And that so women's unemployment stands at something like 20.2%. So, and this is you have to see that in the wider context. I was speaking to some young girls from Kashmir University, and we were just talking about various things, and how as women, that sense of suffocation in that environment where public sphere and public spaces are very often masculinized, and very hard for women to be out and about in the same way in which men are out and about. And somehow the conversation ended up being about reservation of seats in buses for women, like seats for women. And one of them told me that that this, if you ask sometimes if the bus is crowded because the infrastructure is not so good, if on one occasion a woman asked a man to give up the seat for her, and he said, "Why should I give my seat to you? Do women give up jobs for us?" So this idea of this idea of seeing somehow that this narrative that women's greater, I guess, participation in public life is somehow at odds with men's interests needs to be, I think, challenged. And this question of that you raised, is occupation. I wanted to actually reflect on this question. You said, is occupation delaying feminist consciousness amongst Kashmiri women? I don't know. I don't know. I would like to say, what kind of feminist consciousness is possible and recognizable in a zone of occupation? Because it is it's that thin line, it's that difficult line between going with. So, for example, as a woman, many of us would argue, would say that although there are these structures of patriarchy in any other part of India, if we were by ourselves, we would feel a lot more unsafe than in Kashmir. And in general, in society, I'm not talking about the armed forces. I'm not talking about that kind of. Just in general, the everyday level of. I had this idea of borrowing a cycle from somebody and cycling through one stretch of the city, and no local person said anything to me. Two people from north of from Punjab actually, who were on a scooter, started to follow, and at one point, and the first question they asked me was like, they're the only people there who want to give this kind of attention and start stalking somebody. And the first question they said was, "Are you Indian?" And my gut reflex reaction was, "Well, if you are, I'm not." It's that experience of patriarchy, but it has these nuances. And so when you have this debate over these girls, as Mantasha showed you that picture, so this idea that young schoolgirls are throwing these stones, there's one kind of response which is like girls should not be doing this, that boys can be stone pelters. But then there's that other response which comes from women, women of elderly women as well as of schoolgirls themselves, who say, well, this is our struggle too, and I would say, like, one specific girl keeps coming to my mind. She was in this school where I gave this talk. Her name was Fajr, and the level of awareness that these young girls had was just so heartening. That they knew, even the smallest child knows what's happening. It's not like the most educated person aware of current affairs in Delhi will not know the details of what happened. They'll just think, oh, some terrorism, something happening in Kashmir. But the smallest child in an orphanage, you ask them, who's not even, or the girl in the school, and you ask them what's going on, and they'll say, well, Sabzar Bhai was killed, or they'll know, because it's very much part and parcel of how people live their lives as to know what's happening. So the politics is there everywhere, but the way in which I think that question of feminist consciousness and that link that you mentioned at the end between militarization and masculinity is just so significant. And the idea that we do see women as victims, we see women as as agents in a specific context, but we need to, I think, broaden that and be able to see those links not just of women but of militarization and masculinity. One of the things that I have been thinking about is this idea of how, in terms of cartography, in terms of possession, and in terms of imaginary, the very idea of Kashmir and of Kashmiri people is seen in gendered terms. So when the CRPF last year, when there were protests in the Central Reserve Police Force, had said something like someone asked him, when are you going to stop being unjust, and he said something like, when do you stop beating your wife? So this idea that you mentioned and that came up, this idea of using that as a way of humiliating Kashmiri men, the occupation playing a role, plays out in a whole set of ways in which the very holding on, the obsessive holding on of Kashmir is seen in gendered terms. So in newspaper articles, there would be these, recently some person wrote an article, editorial in one of the papers, where they said, well, Kashmir, it's this unrequited, it's seen in terms of this unrequited love, like your wife is turning away from you. So the relationship between India and Kashmir is that India is the husband who cannot keep his wife happy, and that in order to keep the wife happy, you have to be nicer to her or be more understanding. So it's those larger structures as well of imagination and cartography, and the way in which that whole thing is seen in gendered terms, that is, I think, also part and parcel of that obsessive need to treat a population in this way. And then there are the micro levels. But I think the question of masculinity, of hegemonic masculinity, is really also important in how it plays out in an occupation, and how and why that makes certain kinds of feminist consciousness harder to manifest more openly, so that how do we recognize those voices? Is there anything else that I'm dying to say? The role of class is also, of course, important, because meanwhile, while all this is happening, the biggest debates around gender and Muslim people in India are all about the triple talaq issue, which is how Muslims can divorce so easily, and how the Indian state needs to do something about it. While the other interesting thing, of course, is that this narrative of linking up. So when we say women in Kashmir, or women in England, or women in anywhere, the women part is the part that signals the patriarchal context. The in whatever place we are talking about links up with culture / religion / whatever, whatever orientalist thing, whatever essentialist thing you want to ascribe to those people. So when we talk about women in Kashmir, I mean, I want us to carry on and have these questions to really think what happens when we talk about women in a context, and how does that then change when that context is a conflict one. Because that's, I think that's, how does that affect the solidarity? So let's have the questions now, responses, questions. We'll just go into a freewheeling discussion. The end low point that both of these, I think everyone made, was also really important. the link between women and nationalist struggles. Like Enlo asks this thing, she says, well, so many new nation states have been created and yet the structures don't change. So maybe there's something about the way in which this nation state form functions that actually, even with liberations and decolonizations and greater freedoms at the level of the nation state, the patriarchal structures that underlie that state in some way continue to be the same.
Questions?
So, or even just responses or thoughts or like your interest in the topic. Maybe you're working about something else and that links to some of these questions or some of these issues. So you and then you and then.
Right. So
Tell us, about
I'm half Kashmiri and half Caribbean, hence my interest being here this evening. I'm also an activist within the UK. I'm a barrister and a banker, etc. But I've got my own foundation to help increase race diversity within the UK workforce. So I'm very passionate about helping find justice, not only in the UK, but external. And it's very disheartening to hear what's going on. I was aware, but it's good to come here today and actually get some more insight and some more details, especially from the women that are actually from there. I think what I would like to focus on is what can we be doing to actually help. It's great we're doing research and we've got all of this, and it's the same with race diversity within the UK. We've got all these statistics where we've got these figures and we don't have enough black, Asians and minority ethnics maybe being employed within certain sectors or at boardroom levels. But I think one of the key things that we need to do here within the women and also men within Kashmir is actually think, well, what can we be doing to actually help? And I don't know if there's any initiatives here in this country or in Kashmir, apart from the stone throwing and all that sort of stuff, whether there are any organisations that we potentially here in the room, because we've all clearly got an interest, where we could actually have some action after tonight. And this isn't just a research, oh, that's a sad thing, let's go on with our lives. It would be great to see, well, what else can we be doing to actually help to make a positive change for the men and women of Kashmir. And well done. Really, really good to me.
Thank you. What's your name?
Miranda Brown.
Miranda?
Brown, B-R-A-W-N.
Right, so maybe we can take couple of questions together. So the first round, and then have people respond. So, yes, Davish.
Yeah. My question is, just want to draw, in a broader Indian context, we also see a lot of, religious fanatic organizations use women, like, there's Durga Bahini, which is the wing of the VHP and whatnot. And then certain academics have said that within those religious structures, women kind of negotiate their agency. They move around freely in service and defense of an overall religious cause. In the VHP's case, a Hindu Rashtra. And again, not to compare similar organizations in Kashmir, there is one which, I'll just say, there you go, I'll say it. That's a part of the APHC. I don't know how much of a role religion plays in that in terms of mobilizing women, but my question is, to what extent has religion played a role in mobilizing the girls that we see right here? Because I, at least from my novice point of view, sitting here, I don't see like a lot of religious appropriation here right now. So just wondering if you'd elaborate on that.
Hi, my question is for Ishrat. I was really struck by her narrative of when she gave the historical backdrop of the Indian army coming and colonizing Kashmir, and then beyond that, the Muslim patriarchal forces that even stifled the women's group from coming forward. So it was just my curiosity that I wanted to ask that based on her lived experience in Kashmir, how does she see the struggle going on forward, and in what areas can she see the liberation of the women, both from the Indian state as well as from the patriarchal forces within her community, and going forward to a more progressive future?
What's your name?
Ashish.
So maybe have the panelists, maybe let's all respond to that.
If I can just make some
Link to this? Okay.
Yes, of course, yeah. with regards to what you said, I think that's really important for us all. I grew up in Kashmir, and when I look at this girl with a basketball, it just reminds me of the things we did as well. And then where is the support and what is there we can help and support them with. We know, I mean, it's not at all, we can't even compare it compared to what's happening there and the grueling realities there to here. But then we know that domestic violence, poverty, and all kinds of other sexual violence and gender violence has a lot of influence on how women behave and how it affects them. And these are the issues which are sometimes also undermined and not talked much about because of the occupation and the militarization, which are equally oppressive to women. And what are the support services, which we had a discussion about as well, is important for us. And when it comes to women and girls coming out and throwing stones as well, or much as we see it as a symbolic empowerment, at the same time we had also understand that it's a living reality which I faced, seeing my classmate go through it as well, is that in the evenings when when the school will close, you will see military, CRPF surfing around your schools and looking for those girls. And then those girls actually looking up for boys to protect them, the local boys to protect them. So how do they go through it? And there is also this hierarchy of who goes for these protests as well, who's allowed. When it comes to how liberated we feel when there is an occupation, it has its pros and cons as well. Because I remember my dad really wanted me to study further, but not in Kashmir itself. And my uncle was like up and rolling, how can you send a girl out? But my dad had a different perspective. Not that he was a patriarch, but it just helped in a way that girls are moving out, because just to be a doctor and engineer is not the way out, and there isn't much there. So that kind of, in a way, protected and is protecting a lot of us to move out as well, which has its ironical things as well, but it's quite helpful in that sense. And I think that age, you talked about 25 point something. Yeah, I think it's higher probably as well. I believe so. It is. Average. Yeah, but I don't know. So these are just responses I wanted to highlight and which you took. Thank you.
So maybe Ishrat should start?
Yeah. Responding to your question, Ashri, talking about future of women's liberation. So I understand women's agency at the moment is stifled by structural constraints of local structures of patriarchy, because women, as I mentioned, cannot speak out against the imposition of their community's patriarchy. So in a way, we have to understand this, that when we stress about women as agents, we have to sort of pay attention to these structural constraints also. And I think in my understanding, I also highlighted how the armed occupation of Kashmir is also fostering a culture of intolerance and culture of patriarchy within the local community. So a solution, in a sense, to the Kashmir conflict, I think that would definitely go in way of helping the cause of women's liberation in Kashmir. That is one. And also a conversation within the community. I think we have to stop thinking in terms of women's liberation and the national liberation as competing goals. Rather, if we think that these can be achieved simultaneously, and as you talked about women's agency within the fanatic religious organizations, I understand women's agency has to be talked about in various aspects. Even women could be exercising their agency by just being silent about everything what's happening. That could also be an exercise of agency. So I believe here that women have to they have imbibed this patriarchal attitude of this incompatibility between the two. So women also, as my interviews do reveal, that women also believe that, once we achieve the national liberation, then the gender issues, it's our own issue after all. Right now, we cannot afford to open a second battlefront against our own brothers and fathers. That's what many women mentioned to me, that our primary goal at this point of time is to achieve national liberation, and we can sort them our own mess later on. So I think a conversation around those issues that there cannot be an artificial gradation of oppression, some oppression being, the insider's oppression being not that important, while as the outsider oppression getting a primacy and being seen as the only political project that we need to undertake. I think the community needs to be open to this debate, that we do not have to see a conversation about gender issues as some sort of, weakening of the movement. I think in my understanding, that is a strengthening of the movement. When many people talk about that we should not speak about the binaries, various binaries, or various dividers within the society, like there is class, like there is maybe region, rural, urban. I think a silence about these binaries is more hurting the movement than benefiting it. I think if you talk about it, conversation never hurts. It will strengthen the roots of the movement in the longer run. So a conversation should be welcome. Let's not feel that if women are talking about, for instance, if I'm here talking about the patriarchy of the community, let my loyalty not be subjected to suspicion that I'm not loyal enough to the national cause, because if I'm talking about women's liberation, then I cannot be simultaneously talking about national liberation, because my double militancy is maybe then that will be a site of doubt. So I think we have to move ahead of those things and see azadi of freedom in a holistic sense. Azadi not just from political oppression, from every type of oppression. Azadi is an aspiration, and it should be holistic, in my understanding.
I would respond to your question quickly. I often find myself in this position of asking this question, what can be done? I also understand that what needs to be done at the ground level. So I'll tell you from the ground that there are no rape crisis centers, for example. There are no hotlines if you get raped, if you get sexually assaulted. There is no education related to sexual violence. There is no support system for women who suffer from domestic violence. I was having a conversation with Asifa the other day that one of my dreams in life is to have a shelter for women, which under one roof will provide all sort of kind of recourse and help to women, where women can call in, where women can really sleep if they don't have a roof under their head. Many women don't divorce their abusive husbands because they do not have a job. They cannot be economically independent, and they do not have an education to go to the market to go for a job. I know many women who are in abusive relationships and continue to be there because they are not economically independent. I really, with the help of my some friends since college, have been trying to help some women in one way or other, through counseling, through connecting them, putting them in networks, getting them small jobs, but it's really minuscule compared to what exists at the society in terms of problems. I've been following certain cases of domestic violence also, and trying to, in some sort of, create some sort of like some sort of immediate remedy to the people and to the women, but it's not enough. We need support structure as much as one is against the institutionalization and structural rigidity of institutions and all. One has to understand the context in Kashmir, that at this stage the conversation should be around how to create institutions which help women. Later on we can talk about improving those institutions and saying that how having institutions in place can be improved or can be changed for better, but there is an immediacy in having those institutions right now. In my understanding, this is the time when we need a rape crisis center, when we need a shelter place, when we need a counseling cell for women. Mental health is such a big issue. There are statistics from MSF, Doctors Without Borders, which is probably the only organization, international organization, that is allowed to work on ground in Kashmir because it's considered as apolitical. It's Doctors Without Borders. So they have cases and they talk about women, how women come and report PSTD, how women come and report certain sorts of depressions and other stuff. I think holistically there is a need to do stuff on ground. I've been trying to do stuff. We can have a conversation after that and see how something can really be done on ground.
Yes.
That is my response.
Yes.
Yes, to your question about if there are organizations working towards this, One is that, for instance, if there are organizations coming from outside India, and now there is a lot of restriction on that because of many reasons. Foreign people cannot come and they have to take certain permission. And even within India, there is a lot of new rules which do not, the NGOs cannot work with. Many of the NGOs have already been shut down. That's one thing. And so for example, if somebody from India comes to Kashmir and they want to do they want to organize, there is a lot of mistrust also from Kashmiris towards these people, because they always think that they might be appropriating, as Mantash also said, that women's cause might be appropriated, like they might represent it in some other way in order to give some kind of legitimacy to their own oppression and their own occupation. So that is another thing that, in the conflict zone, in such kind of situations, there is no trust, basically, which is, delaying these kind of, works and, organizations and kind of help for these women in Kashmir.
So maybe what these organisations should be doing is working with the women that are already in there, all the men, and helping to empower them to take the action, because if there's no trust with external organisations and outside of Kashmiri, I think it makes sense that we have these external organisations, whether it's in India, Pakistan, in this country, wherever, to work with ladies like yourself who are on the ground and trying to make a difference, rather than saying, oh well, I don't really trust this organisation and it's going to be difficult. It's just an observation, but yeah.
Yeah, it's just that there is a lot of, everything is in binaries right now.
Yeah.
In the whole of India, for instance, you can either be a terrorist supporter or a fanatically nationalist. You're either this way or that way. And there's a very, that middle space is shrinking, and that's very dangerous.
Yes.
Asifa,
Just one more question. How is the mainstream feminism in India? How does it interlink with what's happening in Kashmir at the moment? I know the responses are really like it's a big debate, but is there ever going to be a change in that towards Kashmiri women? Because obviously there are multiple oppressions there, but the media just portrays, and they want to believe that Kashmir is their land, and they always talk about it as a territory. How is this? Are there any changes happening at all?
in terms of mainstream feminism in
in
India,
case of
well,
like
it's I mean it would be rather naive to expect liberal mainstream Indian feminism to to care for Kashmiris, given that caring for the tribal women or women who would at least be would not be part of an occupation like Dalit women, is even that is way beyond the pale. And I guess everyone in this room knows that 2014 onwards, the current government, the Modi-led BJP government, has seen a complete sort of rollback of various kinds of progressive voices, not to mention vindictive attacks on various institutions, individuals, and the level of discourse across the spectrum is right now abysmal and very regressive. Not unlike, in many ways provoking similarities of thought with Trump's America. So, and they have supporters who also overlap. So I would, I think that the question of doing that kind of emancipatory politics is just so difficult, because it's that final thing, whether we talk of feminism or whether we talk of Indian nationalism, it's that glass ceiling, that glass ceiling of occupation that you hit up against, because you can. The question of trust is so important, because it's not that the lack of trust is, in my view, I would say the lack of trust is not just, it doesn't just happen to be there, it's actively encouraged. That the lack of trust between Kashmiris is a very important source of power for the occupation. So, not only are there entire, not only I'm sure are there entire paid budgets of informers whose job it is to inform the state, which obviously do exist, but that this lack of trust, so anybody in that the atmosphere is so vitiated that anybody who's trying to do anything, who doesn't already align themselves or doesn't already fit on the chessboard of the existing players will be seen as like, why is this person doing this, or why is this organization doing this, what's in it for them? Because everything is so susceptible to be appropriated by one side or the other, or to threaten existing interests. So the situation is just like, it's in some sense depressing, but that's how we have to still find ways of dealing with it to create the kinds of political space that need to be created. Because, you know, just if you even set some, there are so many vested interests in a conflict zone. There are so many arenas of profitability. People have constituencies that matter. There are budgets. There's a lot of corruption that goes unchallenged because it's an occupation. There's a lack of accountability. There's legal basis to that lack of accountability in terms of emergency powers. So in that context, it's just, I mean, we have to also stop and, you know, and question that impulse of, can we immediately make change? Because part of making that change is to question the ways in which that occupation is functioning and the way in which it poisons everything, everywhere. So like, you know, from every, like literally street and road corners. And it's not, and secondly, to somehow within that context specifically, in my view, get the narrative across that it's not just affecting the women, it's affecting the men. You know, every time that guy has to go and do everything, you know, for the hospital for the mother, the college for the sister, the something else, you know, the groceries because there's a curfew, make sure that his friend's sister is somewhere safe. Every time that man is under that kind of pressure, and he is under that pressure because his sister cannot go out because there's that curfew zone, the clerk will probably not deal with a woman. So it's that diffuse kind of capillary network of patriarchy that's everywhere. So it puts pressure on that man too, on the men too, to deal with all of that, and then either to find employment outside of the struggle, which is somehow being, you know, kind of compromising, or to give up things and to be that, you know, to somehow play out a sacrifice, which again is, so it's the question is to get across that it's not, you know, this is everyone's problem, and especially in an occupation zone, that it's hurting the cause, and the wider structures of power matter. So instead of and your point about the conversations never hurt is so important. That, you know, whether you agree or disagree with me, Ashish, Mantasha, you know, Ishrat, Asya, it's important to have these conversations, because otherwise how do we reach? And that's again part of the problem, that conversation and communication is sought to be shut down too, because, you know, there are limited avenues of making that conversation continually possible. Like social media, for example, is a space where that can happen, but it can literally be turned off like that. You know, people can just literally be like in an hour realize that they can't speak to each other anymore, and that's hard.
Asifa, adding on to what Natasha said, in 2014, so I was working for the government. I was in a government job, and before that I was briefly working with an NGO, so I had some understanding of how NGOs work and how we can invite them. So I met this group of 1 Billion Rising, which is a global event and all. So around 14th of February they organize these flash mobs and all. So I had a conversation. I said that I can organize something in Kashmir, but not a flash mob. I'll organize something. I'll organize something more acceptable. I'll kind of make an announcement. I'll call women. They'll tell their stories. We'll write stuff. I compiled it later on, made it into a small booklet. So I organized workshops for women. It was wonderful. It was amazing. But when I go back to my office next day, I'm told that, madam, you're not in an NGO anymore, you're working for the government, so you cannot really go and organize workshops with women. This is not done. And in a newspaper, I see a headline that a government officer is trying to engage women and doing something with them. So I was like, oh my God, I'm caught and sandwiched from both sides, and both sides were pressurizing me. And this struggle of my engaging with NGOs, my engaging with government, my engaging with women is often questioned by many people who have, I believe, some sort of ulterior motives. I mean, that's how I understand it. And I have been often sandwiched for a long time, and I continue to, it continues. Whenever I raise a voice against something, why aren't you talking about this? That what about tree of, narratives never ends. So bringing in mainstream feminists is also is a little tricky, but it can be done. And there are some certain very few voices in India, like for example Urvashi, Batalia, and
Well, I was thinking Uma.
very few who are genuinely interested in women, not in the project of nationalism or patriotism, in which women are just instruments and can be portrayed or dovetailed into the larger project. There are genuine voices, but to engage with them is difficult, and it definitely will take time. And on a small level, things are happening. It's not absolutely hopeless.
The question about religion never got answered. Tanish's question. No, it's not. I mean, yeah, religion has. I mean, the communalization is of course all recent, and when I say recent, in the longer run, I mean, of course there are problems, but it's fundamentally not a communal struggle. And whether Parveen Togadia says it or Zakir Musa says it, that doesn't make it communal.
Yeah, I just have a comment or a question for all four actually. I really appreciate Natasha, you mentioning about how when one talks about being a Kashmiri, the whole idea of being a Muslim directly is taken forward, right? For myself as well, my research has largely been on Tibetan Muslims who are located in Srinagar and who claimed their Kashmiri ancestry, and they came and they're currently in Srinagar. But in that context, with such ethnic diversity as well, for all four of you, who would be considered a Kashmiri if individually, if you could just
You put us on the spot.
just highlight a little on that.
What's your name?
Anisa. Like for individually, perspectives will differ definitely, but in your
That's a very difficult question, Anisa. I met Anisa yesterday. We had a conversation around this. Do you want to go ahead?
Not a difficult question for me at all. So I'll be happy to answer, but
I don't know. I mean, whoever identifies as a Kashmiri is a Kashmiri to begin with. And no, I understand what Anisa means, that it's difficult in terms of its contextualization, like in terms of history, geography, boundary. So for instance, Kashmiris on either side of borders, Indian side and Pakistani sides, both are Kashmiris. And then there is a politics of Kashmiri center and Kashmiri periphery. So Kashmiri speaking Kashmiris and those people who claim to be Kashmiris but do not speak Kashmiri. There are Gujars, there are Bakarwals. For instance, there are on the other side of border there are Mirpuris, who I don't think most people do speak Kashmiri, and then they claim an identity of being a Kashmiri, and there is a politics which is played within. So we are the true supremacist real Kashmiris. You are just in the periphery. So that also goes into there, and I think that's what she's hinting at. And when she talked about Tibetan Muslims, Muslim settlements in Srinagar, I lived in that area. I grew up there, Navakadal, Idgah area. Yeah. So Tibetan Muslims have never been able to assimilate or integrate with the Kashmiri community as such, because they are never recognized as Kashmiris. We just know that there is this colony which sells momos and which makes nice food. We go there and eat at their restaurant.
The idea would be that they would be taken as refugees, right? Because when they were brought in as well, the whole, that is why I really appreciate when she mentioned being a Kashmiri, the idea is taken as Muslim, because when it was mentioned that being a Tibetan, then it was identified directly as being a refugee, not giving scope for any other aspect to come forward as well, right?
Yeah.
Because when I interviewed them, this whole idea of them, when I even questioned them, then would you go back, if Tibet gets free? But their sense of, no, we are Kashmiris, why would we go back, was very staunch, and it was very present in almost all the answers.
And I think that's true as well for people who identify as Kashmiri and who don't speak what is the Kashmiri language.
Yeah.
So for me, the answer is very simple. Anybody who identifies as Kashmiri or has claims to identity, that could be people who have left a long time ago, maybe like decades ago, or even previous waves of people who had left. So it's not. I think the question really is what happens when we say this thing of will the real Kashmiri please stand up? Like this, who's the real Kashmiri? And what is the context within which that gains salience, and how do we challenge that? So for example, a month or so ago, or maybe a couple of months ago, in Meerut, a city, there was these posters started appearing saying that Kashmiris get out of here. These were like, these. So now in that poster, these presumably Hindutva groups who want Kashmiris to leave. So because when they say Kashmiris get out of Meerut, what they mean is, Kashmiri students are often, when I say Kashmiri, obviously Kashmiri Muslim students, but the idea is Kashmiris get out of Meerut, where they mean Kashmiri Muslims. And so the question then is, I think, why doesn't, for example, a Kashmiri Pandit or a Kashmiri somebody else go there? The identity that would presumably most work is that of a Kashmiri Pandit, who would be Hindu Kashmiris, to go and to say, well, I am a Kashmiri, do you want me to get out of Meerut? Because you would be doing that whole not in my name thing, and as well as forcing the other side to say, well, actually what we mean is Muslims who are Kashmiris, get out of here. And that's, it's that thing of this assumption, Kashmiri equals Muslim equals whatever, and it's true, you go to Ladakh, things are quite different, and and there are different there is a different cultural context on the other side of the line of control, and Jammu is very different even, but the erstwhile, if you say the erstwhile princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, that entire territory has, to one extent or the other, all the peoples who have some kind of Himalayan mountain, or even that entire region, Central Asian kind of links, is an important borderland place. And so all the various communities who maybe didn't assimilate and become like the one community, but they are all a part of some kind of belonging to Kashmir. And again, that the reason of whether they would want to choose to claim that belonging or not also depends on the context. So it's not like you are a Kashmiri or you're not. It depends on whether within that context you want to identify as a Kashmiri, or why do you identify at one point and not at another point. Like if you look at the case of Ladakh, that's quite clear. Or even more increasingly Jammu, like the thing that has happened with the split between the communities that has become wider over time is that pan-Kashmiri-ness, and there are very few pan-Kashmiri voices actually. The Gujars and Bakarwal case that you mentioned is so relevant because they're very much a part and parcel, but again politicized and treated as a separate voting bloc or whatever, rather than being included even by the resistance, these other kinds of voices included as part of Kashmiri identity.
Or even the understanding of 2.5 districts in Jammu to be closer to Kashmir by way of their being Muslims. So it is a definitely complicated question.
But I also want to add that, as I said before, that we don't have to shy away from recognizing various fractures within the community, or we don't have to, because there is, whether we accept it or not, there is a hegemonic understanding of what it means to be Kashmiri, which one of the aspects of that Natasha already highlighted is being Muslim, or there may be many other characteristics associated to that. So often we tend to be silent around this issue as well. So we have to be alert to different markers of exclusion and alienation that many people, many sections of the society do face when it comes to defining, because sometimes you are actually denied the agency of identifying yourself as a Kashmiri. You're being told by other people that maybe you do not look Kashmiri enough. So I think there is my solution is that let's start a conversation around these themes which we don't speak of.
Or the Indian state, I mean, like this question of like how do you choose, like to even identify as a Kashmiri in many contexts, it would be seen as, well, seriously, some kind of like big problem. Like, how can you say you're Kashmiri? You have to say like you're primarily Indian, first of all. Like if you say your nationality is Kashmiri, or that, that's that. So there are these ways, this thing of, it's